Good morning, everyone. The reading this morning is from the New International Version, Exodus 3, verses 1 to 15. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that, though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you, that is, I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say to the Israelites, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation.
Hey, good morning. My name's Caleb. It's a privilege to preach this morning. I'm the assistant pastor at Harbourside. What a joy to be in the house of the Lord together this morning. Thanks for joining us. I've loved this series in Exodus. In week 1, Dave talked a little bit about why it's worthwhile diving back into an ancient book, an Old Testament book. One of the reasons I love it is that part of being a member of a family is getting to know the stories of the family. And you know, you feel like a member of the family if you know the family's stories. Even if you're not a part of that family, if you grew up with them around the table, maybe you've been a part of some of the stories, but you just know the stories that Dad tells every single Thanksgiving, every single Christmas, every single time the stories come up, and you just get to know them. And if you've joined a new family, part of becoming a part of the new family is learning a new set of stories. And we're the family of God. We're the adopted children of God, and we get to learn the family stories. And Exodus is the family story. It's the story that they tell every Passover. Here we go again. Dad's sitting at the table. He's going to tell us the Passover story one more time. So this is us getting to know the family stories. And they just unfold so beautifully and have so much to teach us. I don't know what you'll take away from today's message, but I'm trusting God's Spirit, and I'm trusting just the quality of these family stories to leave us with something. Preaching this series feels a little bit like a Netflix series where each week we drop a new episode. And so they really follow right on top of each other. You can always listen to the previous sermons through the podcast or on YouTube. Week 1 is pretty dire God's people find themselves in slavery, and the slavery is getting only harder and harder. The Israelites are in Egypt. They find themselves enslaved. Dave asked the question, where is God in this? Where is God in this slavery? Where is God when things are not going to plan? Week 2, things go from bad to worse. Pharaoh gives permission to Egyptians and commands them to commit genocide and to take any Hebrew male babies and throw them into the Nile River. And the question that week was, where is God? How can God bring good out of this? Not how can God make this good, this is not good, but how can this story end any other way than misery and terror? And this week we move into Exodus chapter 3, where we start to get some answers to those questions. Chapter 2 ends this way. We didn't go into this last week. Moses is drawn up out of the water by Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter brings Moses, and he's raised in the house of Pharaoh. He grows up with this sort of torn identity, which really comes to the fore when he sees a Hebrew, an Israelite, one of his blood, someone that looks like him, that has his features, his eyes, his hair, his skin color, his blood. He sees one of the Israelites being beaten and whipped by an Egyptian. He's seen this before. It's not something he's unfamiliar with. But in this moment, something snaps in him. He's grown up as an Egyptian, but not really. He knows he looks like the Hebrews. He knows that many of his generation were killed, but somehow he was spared. And yet here he is growing up in the palace of Pharaoh. But he has this conflict of identities that boils over in a moment, and he kills the Egyptian who's beating this Hebrew slave. He thinks no one has seen it, but people have, and word gets to Pharaoh, and soon there's a bounty out on Pharaoh's head because Moses defended an Israelite against an Egyptian and killed the Egyptian. So Moses runs away, flees into the wilderness in an area called Midian. He marries into a shepherding family and becomes a shepherd out in the countryside. And once again, it's like, where is this going? Chapter 2 ends with these words. The chapters are added much later in the editing process, but it's such a great place to end a chapter. It's that scene of episode 2 before the credits roll that you just can't wait for chapter 3. It says this: during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help went up to God. God heard their groaning. He remembered his covenant to Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Roll credits. Chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro. Was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness, came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Horeb means desert. It wasn't the mountain of God yet. Horeb means desert. Later on in Exodus, it's going to be called Mount Sinai. They're the same place. Sinai means thorny. It's a desert mountain, thorny mountain. It was a normal mountain. Moses had been a shepherd for probably decades at this point. This is not his first time passing Desert Mountain. He's been past it 100 times before, and he'll be past it 100 times again, he assumes. There's nothing special about this place for him yet. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire. From within a bush, Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses, and Moses said, here I am. This starts off as a pretty casual interaction. Moses is very rare to see a fire randomly start in the wilderness. It catches his eye as he's with his sheep, and he walks over to see it, and he hears someone call his name, and Moses says, Hineh, Hebrew, which is the most, casual form of, hey, Moses, what's up? Like, I'm here. Hello? Who said that? Like, what's happening? And wait, why is this bush not burning? Hello? What's going on? It starts out as this very casual, out of curiosity sort of thing. And then God says to him, "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place you're standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. It switches here from curious to serious pretty quickly. I imagine it's, the command here is forceful, and I imagine it was loud. Do not come any closer. People that get too close to God in the Old Testament die. Don't come any closer. I imagine it's sort of like when my 2-year-old hears something break in the kitchen, maybe a glass shatters, and he comes running in, and I've told him 700 commands today that he's ignored, but I need him to listen to this one. And, it's just like instinctive. You're just able to sort of, don't come any closer. And I don't know, they kind of get that, like, you're serious about this one, and they listen. This is what I imagine, as Moses is just like, what's this bush going on? Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, just a sign of respect. Remove anything between you and the ground, because the place that you're standing is holy ground. Moses has been by this mountain before. It's never been holy before, but in this case it is. The presence of God has descended upon this mountain, in this bush, in this moment, and it's holy and it's sacred. And God introduces himself as the God of your father and the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And Moses at least knows those names and recognizes that he's standing in the presence of something worth taking your shoes off for. So he removes his sandals and he covers his face because he's afraid to look at God. The Lord said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them." The question that Exodus is answering more than any other question is, who is Yahweh? Who is our God? And here in Exodus 3, I think we get the clearest theophany, sighting of God, God revelation theophany, the clearest theophany that we will get until Jesus. Here in Exodus 3, we hear the voice of God. We hear what God is going to do, and then of course in a moment the divine name is going to be revealed and given to Moses. And I think it's this sort of clearest, most profound moment of God's self-disclosure until Jesus is born in the New Testament. Who is this God? First, he's the God who sees, El Roi, the God who sees. Hagar, who is the despised mother of Ishmael, Abraham's first child through Sarah's maidservant, Hagar calls God El Roi. She's the first one to name God with this when she's sent away into the wilderness by Sarah, but God goes and finds her and comforts her, and Hagar gives God the name El Roi. God is the God who sees, the God who hears, the God who is concerned. God is concerned about the suffering of the people. He sees it, he hears it, he is concerned. He is the God who comes down, and he is the God who rescues. Those are the 5 things that God says happen. I have seen, I have heard, I am concerned. I will come down and I will rescue. Where is God? How can God bring good out of this? Of course, we wish that there didn't need to be pain. We wish there didn't need to be cries that go up to God. And we long for that world and we hope for it someday. But in this world of pain and longing and suffering, God is the God who sees, who hears, the God who has compassion, who comes down and who rescues. Or at least that's what he's claiming so far in Exodus 3. That's what he's claiming he will do. And the rest of the story is finding out whether God can deliver on those things. All of this must be really good news to Moses, right? This is great. He has had this yearning for the liberation of the Hebrews in his body since he was a kid and started to realize, wait, those are kind of my people. It's the yearning that breaks free when he kills the Egyptian. This is great news. The Hebrew people, the Israelites, are going to be free. God is going to step forward and do something. This is good news that God announces to Moses. It's his rescue plan. And then verse 10 drops. And verse 10 says this: "So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh." Come again? That sounds great. I am going to go, I am going to come down, I am going to rescue, I am going to show Pharaoh who's king, I'm going to set the Israelites free, and that all sounds great. And then verse 10, "So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh." Yikes. A theme in chapter 1 and 2 is that God uses unlikely means to accomplish his ends. And as much as it is true that it is in God's character to hear and to see and to rescue, seems like it's as much in his character to use human beings to do this work, right? Chapter 3 could have gone, and Moses, I'm going to send a dragon, and he's going to eat Pharaoh. But that's not the story we get, right? That's never the story in the Bible. It's always, and I'm going to use you, Moses, ex-felon convict, fleed to Midian to live out your days as a shepherd. I'm sending you. Well, Moses has 5 things to say about that. We're going to look at each one. And it's going to take us into chapter 4 a little bit. Here's the first thing Moses says. Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Fair question. If you were having your sort of quiet time and you lit a candle and the candle burned down the wick and you're like, wow, that's still burning. I'm surprised that wick's still on fire. And then you heard a voice that said, Go to Putin and tell him to end the war in Ukraine. Yeah, you'd laugh. And you'd call your therapist. And you'd be like, I'm hearing voices. You'd go to Dave. You'd say, Dave, I heard God tell me to go to Putin and tell him to end the war in Ukraine. And Dave would say, let me see if Derek's available to talk to you. Right? I mean, no. This is insane what Moses is hearing commanded to him. Go to Pharaoh and tell him to let your workforce go. Why? Because I said so. And God said, here's God's response to him. I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. That's cool, but I'm not packing my bags. This is the pattern we see over and over again in Moses' responses. Who am I? I cannot do this. I can't do this. And God's response is always, you're not going to. I am. I'm going to do it. God doesn't say, well, Moses, look at your resume. Don't you see how, you grew up in an Egyptian house, you understand the courts, your Egyptian's rusty, but it'll come back. And now you shepherded for 40 years in the wilderness. You're really ready to lead a people through the wilderness. No, he doesn't. No, that's not the answer. He's about to send Moses to the God King Pharaoh, the most powerful person on planet Earth, to tell him to let his workforce go. His resume is not enough. He's not ready for this. He's not capable of doing it. He says, I know, you're right. This is bigger than you. You're not going to go on your own. You can't. I can. I am going with you. You are not the main character. I am. So Moses says, sorry if I get these wrong. I think these are right. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? What shall I tell them? His first question is basically, hey, who am I to do this? Fair enough, good question. His second question is, who are you? And when the people say, when I show up and I say, hey, I'm here to set you free, and they ask, yeah, who sent you? What do I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. There's so much to say about this, and there's also not that much to say about this. And what I mean by that is there's more mystery around the name of God than there is certainty about what it means. God doesn't give Moses a name like other gods, Horus, other Ra, other names, that names that you could just say to conjure up a deity. This is no name you can just shout to conjure something. It is a mysterious name. I am who I am. Haya Aser Haya is what God says to Moses. My sense is that it's God saying, I am who I am. I'm going to be who I'm going to be. Tell them that I am has sent me to you. That phrase, I am, is what we know today as Yahweh. We occasionally will sing in a song or come across in a verse of the Bible. It's called the Tetragrammaton, the 4 letters. Yod He Vav He in Hebrew, YHWH. It's some version of the verb to be, but it's tricky to know what exactly is supposed to be meant by it, and I think it's God's will that it's tricky to know what exactly is meant by it. But it's tricky to know because in Hebrew, there's no vowels when you write out Hebrew. The vowel pointings are always underneath or above the letter. So 3 dots is like the ah sound, and then I forget all the other ones, but I know some of them. So the vowel pointings are under. They're not written into the text. And in the oldest manuscripts, there's no vowel pointings. So Hebrew scholars have to simply work out, based on the consonants and the context, what version of a word or a verb is intended when it's used. So it's very difficult. And so all we have is Yod He Vav He. We don't have the vowels. We insert Yahweh, A and E, because we guess that's probably how people spoke it most often. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. I exist as I exist. I create as I create. And if you find someone who's sure they know exactly what it means, be careful. Because it is just a name full of mystery and wonder, and that's part of the point. I am who I am. Tell them the I am has sent you. All right, Moses answered, well, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Another very reasonable question. Moses shows up, hey, the I am has sent me to you. And they say, are you sure you weren't dehydrated? That seems far more likely than a burning bush told you to come set us free from Pharaoh. And so, what if they don't believe me when I say the Lord did not appear to you? And here God gives Moses a little bit of evidence. And he first says, what do you have in your hand? Moses says, a staff. He says, throw it on the ground. Moses throws the staff on the ground, and it becomes a snake. And Moses runs from it. So it's a scary snake, I guess. Moses runs from the snake, and then God says, pick it up by the tail, and Moses does, and it becomes a staff again. He says, put your hand inside your cloak. Moses does it. He pulls it out, and it's covered in some sort of skin disease. God says, put your hand back in your cloak, and he pulls it out again, and the flesh is restored. And then he says, if they don't believe these 2 signs, go to the Nile River, scoop out water, pour it in the dirt, and it will become blood. Moses, of course, can't do that one there, but later on in the book, we are going to see him do that miracle as well. So each of these 3 things, obviously miraculous, obviously giving Moses credit among his people that a God who has some legitimate power has sent him. They're also all of them symbolic. The cobra is the image of the house of Egypt. I was familiar with images of sort of pharaohs wearing headdresses with cobras on them. So the first sign, it's no accident that the staff turns into a snake, and Moses has control over the snake. God can create snakes and cause snakes not to exist. The second one, God has power over disease, and then God has power over the Nile River, the source of life, and blood, the other source of life. Both of those things just representing all that is life in Egypt. So those are convincing, I think. I think Moses maybe starts to take this command a little bit seriously. And here we get his fourth thing. We're almost through here. Fourth, Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." It seems like a basic requirement of this job is that you want someone well-spoken. And you're looking for someone who has some experience in high-level negotiation. I don't have any of that. So, and God says to him, shoot, you're right. My bad. Forget all of this. Forget I revealed myself to you. I hadn't thought of that. Man, you're right. Moses literally says, I have a heavy tongue and a heavy mouth. What does that mean? You have a stutter, a mouthful of marbles. I don't know. No, what does God say to him here? This is in chapter 4. The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say." Once again, Moses now really focusing in on his own weaknesses, focusing in on how he's going to fumble it, how he's going to look. And God saying, I've got you, Moses. I've got you. I'm not worried about that. And here's the fifth thing Moses says. "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Yeah, anybody prayed that? Man, please send someone else, not me. Please send someone else. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. And he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you. He will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help you both speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. Take your staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it." It's interesting in this fifth rebuttal where Moses just says, "Please send someone else." God goes back to his insecurity. He goes back to his weakness, what Moses is worried about, his speech, and he addresses that more specifically. He addresses Moses' insecurity with more clarity and reveals to Moses that he has already made provision for Moses' weakness. It hasn't caught him off guard. Moses complains about his speech being terrible, and God says, "I made mouths, you'll be fine." But he isn't going to make Moses a great public speaker. He isn't going to turn Moses into some silver-tongued great orator that gives incredible speeches, right? He isn't going to turn Moses' weakness into Moses' own strength. He's going to use Moses' weakness as his own strength because Moses is not the main character of the story. I need to be good at this before I go. I have to iron out all my weaknesses before I'm ready. I have to have this all sorted before I take this step. No. Go, Moses. I have already made provision. And here, after Moses says, "Please someone else," God, kind of pulls the curtain back and shows Moses a little bit of the plan. But I was thinking about how usually when we say no, God respects our no. This is a particular case, right? Moses gets the voice of God in a bush. He gets these signs, and Moses is not going to be able to say no. But usually for us, when we get, God respects our no. When I feel this urge to go have a conversation with that person or make that phone call, send that text, ask that person to lunch, take that trip. Maybe it's something bigger like a job or a move or something. When we say no, God lets us say no. I was just thinking about how many times have I missed Aaron already on the road because I've said no? And occasionally you say yes, and you go up and talk to someone and you find out they've just lost, a loved one. And you coming over to them to say something meant the world. And if you said no, like, you'd be fine, but like, you'd never find that out. Or you say yes and you go somewhere and you find, man, someone you haven't seen in 10 years that you really wanted to reconnect, that wants to partner with you on this thing that you've been thinking about. And if you had said no, you'd like miss out on that. Aaron was already on the road. And I wonder if Aaron had his own burning bush, his own dream, his own conviction, something that sent him and said, okay, I'll go. And there could have been this moment where Moses is going, he's worried about how he's going to talk and what he's going to do, and he looks up and there's, what are you doing? And there's this moment where Aaron's like, there was a burning fig tree or something, and sent me, and then Moses is like, yeah, me too, and they're on the road together. But when we say no, God usually respects that no, and we miss out on God's provision of our weakness and God's provision along the way. Again and again, Moses places himself at the center of the story, not realizing that Yahweh is the protagonist, the primary actor in this story. He's worried about his own performance. We are not the main characters in the story. Harbourside is not the main character in its own story. Harbourside exists as a vessel for God's mission in Mosman that predates us by centuries and is going to go on far after any of us are here anymore. God has a mission in this community, in this area. And God invited Dave and Pip to be a part of that mission and to say yes to what God was doing here. And they could have said no, and God's mission would have figured out another way to move forward. And they said yes. All right, let's take a step. Let's just take one little step, one step at a time. And that's kind of what Newish Night is, we get to hear the story of just like the one step at a time. And then he invited, more people to be a part of that mission. And Ben and Amaris and Allie and Sean and all the people. You're here today because you're invited to be a part of God's mission. And we can sort of lose focus on that in two ways. We can sort of say, no, we've got this figured out. Like, no, we got our feet planted. We know what we're doing. We've got it. And we can sort of lose track of the fact that it's not our mission. It's God's mission here in Mosman. And we can sort of get too big for our britches. Or we can go the other way and say, we just don't have enough space. We don't have enough resources. We're tapped out. We can't do that. We can't make that happen. And we forget, it's God's mission. God's going to make a way. God provides. What a revolutionary idea. You are not the main character in your story. It strikes me as maybe a bit deflating at first, maybe dispiriting. I kind of want to be don't I at least get to be the main character in my story? But Moses was an ex-felon Midianite shepherd. And now he's like the 12th most famous man in history, or something like that. It's not deflating to not be the main character in your own story if you get to be a character in Yahweh's story. I'm not enough for that. I can't do this. I can't do it. No, Moses, my sweet child, you can't. But I'm not waiting for you to become enough. I'm going to do it. I just need you to walk. Egypt's that way. But what about how everyone will receive me and what they'll say? I'm not worried about that. You shouldn't worry about that either. I'm a terrible speaker. I'm too busy. I've never done that. I have no experience with that. I'm too exhausted. I just can't do it. Moses, child, I've already done it. I've already met needs you didn't know you had. I've already created pathways where there were obstacles you didn't know existed. You don't see a way through, but when you were a baby, you were just in a basket. And I had you drawn out by Pharaoh's daughter and breastfed by your own mother. And Moses, waters are going to part again. You're worried about stumbling over the words? Oh, Moses, if you knew what you should worry about, you wouldn't take one more step. You are going to be standing on the edge of the raging sea, and Pharaoh's army is going to be coming behind you with all of their force to kill you. And you're going to be standing there helpless and hopeless. And you know what, Moses? I've got you then. And you're going to be parched and in the desert, and there's going to be no water for hundreds of miles, and you're going to be hungry and in the wilderness, and there's going to be no food. But you know what, Moses? The waters are going to part. I'm going to make water come from a rock. I'm going to make bread fall from the sky. You don't even know what you should be worried about yet, child. If this relied on you, you wouldn't be enough. But I'm the main character, so you are enough. And you don't have to be anything more than what you are. I'm the one who sees and hears and rescues. So grab your staff. Egypt's that way. You just walk. It was just a normal bush. It's just a mountain called desert. Moses was just a shepherd with a conviction. It's just a conference room, a commute, a friend you haven't seen. It's just a normal conversation. There are no spaces that aren't sacred. And there are no people too normal, too broken to be a part of Yahweh's story. You are a part of a story that's absolutely ordinary and absolutely holy. Part of a story whose protagonist is the one who was and is to come. And the same God who used Moses uses us today. We are not the main characters in our own stories, and we don't have the full script. And it's scary to live when you don't have the full script, but it's good. And it works out in the end. God's response hasn't changed. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. Watch and see. I'm about to show you who I am. I'm the one who sees and cares, who comes down and who rescues. And your story will be consumed by mine, and it will be better for it. So take your staff and walk. Let's pray. Loving God, we give you our stories. And when we look back, we see your hand at work in our lives. We see your hand at work in this church, in this community. God, give us the courage. Give us the courage to walk, take a step of faith, to trust you, to let go of being the main character on our own story, and to trust that being a character in your story is so much better. I pray that you'll help each of us know what it means to wrestle with that truth today and give us clarity and conviction about what that might mean for our week ahead. We love you. We pray this in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.